if I told you that thousands of trained searchers combed through miles of wilderness, deployed helicopters equipped with infrared scanners, tracked footprints, found a missing boy's camera, and still never found him? Not a bone, not a backpack, not a single trace. Some disappearances are tragic. Others are terrifying because they leave behind one question no one can answer. What really happened? In the summer of 1991, 12-year-old Jared Negretti set out on what should have been an unforgettable Boy Scout adventure. Alongside 14 other scouts, he was hiking toward the summit of Mount San Gorgonio, the highest peak in Southern California. Nobody could have imagined that it would be the last time anyone ever saw him. Jared was and Oppos, the strongest hiker in the group. Shorter and heavier than most of the other boys, he often lagged behind. As evening approached and shadows stretched across the mountain trails, another group of hikers noticed Jared struggling nearly 1,000 feet below the summit. They watched as he ignored the winding switchbacks and began cutting directly down the steep slopes. The hikers warned him, "Stay on the trail. Don and Oppos, take shortcuts." Jared reportedly nodded and continued on. Those would be the last confirmed words anyone ever exchanged with him. At the summit, the scoutmaster was informed that Jared had fallen behind. Confident in his experience, he assured everyone that he would pick the boy up on the descent. But when he finally reached the area where Jared had been seen, the boy had vanished. No cries for help, no footprints leading away, no sign of fall, nothing. As darkness swallowed the mountain, panic set in. The scoutmaster rushed the other boys back to camp before hiking nearly 5 miles through the wilderness to get help. By dawn, one of the largest search operations in California history had begun. Sheriff and Oppos, deputies, rescue teams, horse-mounted units, and helicopters flooded the San Gorgonio wilderness. Searchers combed through more than 130 square miles of rugged terrain. Then came the clues. A footprint matching Jared and Oppos' high-top tennis shoe, candy wrappers, beef jerky packaging, and most chilling of all, his camera. Inside the recovered camera roll were 12 photographs. Most showed harmless mountain scenery and snapshots from the hike. But the final image was different. A self-portrait, Jared staring directly into the camera lens, the flash illuminating his face against the darkness. A lonely image taken by a boy who may have already realized he was hopelessly lost. Or worse, investigators theorized he may have slipped down a mountainside while cutting the switchbacks. Yet despite thousands of searchers spending more than 45,000 combined hours searching nearly 50 square miles of wilderness, no body was ever discovered. Others suggested a bear attack, but there was no blood, no torn clothing, no drag marks, no evidence of any animal encounter. Then came an even darker possibility: abduction. The mountain was frequently traveled by hikers. Could someone have encountered Jared while he was alone and vulnerable? No evidence supported the theory, but no evidence ruled it out either. More than 3 decades later, Jared Negretti remains one of America and Oppos' most baffling wilderness disappearances, and his final photograph continues to haunt those who have seen it. But as strange as Jared and Oppos' case is, the next mystery may be even more disturbing, because this time it wasn't Oppos' one person who vanished. It was 5. On the freezing night of February 24th, 1978, 5 young men left Yuba County, California, excited to watch a college basketball game. By the next morning, they had seemingly disappeared from the face of the earth. Bill Sterling, Jack Hewitt, Ted Wire, Jack Madruga, and Gary Mathias. All 5 were looking forward to participating in a special Olympics basketball game the following day. They had carefully laid out their uniforms before leaving. Family members expected them home that night. They never returned. Days later, investigators discovered something deeply unsettling. Their car, abandoned high in the remote mountains of the Plumas National Forest. The location made no sense. The vehicle sat nearly an hour in the wrong direction from where the men should have traveled. Even stranger, the car wasn't in Oppos' broken down. It wasn't in Oppos' out of gas. It wasn't in Oppos' damaged. It was simply stuck in a snowbank. 5 healthy adult men could have pushed it free. Instead, they left it behind and vanished into the darkness. Inside the car were empty snack wrappers and drink bottles. Nothing else. Then the snow came. A powerful storm swept across the mountains, erasing potential footprints and burying whatever clues might have existed. As search teams struggled to piece together the mystery, witnesses began coming forward. One man named Joseph Shans claimed he had become stranded nearby that same night. While suffering what he later described as a heart attack, he saw flashlight beams moving through the darkness. He believed he saw a group of men. Desperate for help, he called out. No one answered. The lights simply drifted away into the night. Another witness claimed she encountered 5 men traveling in a red pickup truck over the weekend following the disappearance. According to her, 2 entered her store to buy food and use a telephone while the others remained outside. If true, it meant the men survived for days after abandoning their vehicle. But where were they going? And what were they running from? No one knows, because what investigators would eventually discover in the mountains would only deepen the mystery. A mystery that, nearly 50 years later, still leaves experienced detectives searching for answers. And some believe the truth may be far stranger than anyone dares imagine. What investigators uncovered months later only made the mystery even darker. As winter finally loosened its grip and the snow began to melt in June of 1978, searchers hoped the thaw would reveal answers. Instead, it uncovered a nightmare. A local man noticed that a window on a remote Forest Service trailer had been shattered. When authorities entered the trailer, they discovered the body of Ted Weiher lying inside. The scene was baffling and deeply unsettling. Ted appeared to have survived for weeks, possibly as long as 13 weeks after the group first disappeared. Yet somehow, despite being surrounded by resources that could have saved his life, he died of starvation. His body was wrapped tightly in multiple blankets. His feet were horribly frostbitten, suggesting he had endured weeks of freezing temperatures. But what investigators found around him made no sense. A working fireplace sat untouched. Materials to start a fire were readily available. A heating system was present. Neither had been used. Even stranger, warm winter clothing was found inside the trailer, yet Ted never put it on. Nearby were supplies of food that could have sustained him for months. Most of it remained unopened. To experienced investigators, the scene felt almost impossible to explain. Why would a man slowly starve to death while surrounded by food? Why freeze while blankets, heat, and winter clothing were within arm and Oppo's reach? And perhaps most chilling of all, what had happened to the others? The answer only raised more questions. Roughly 20 miles from where the men and Oppo's abandoned vehicle had first been discovered, search teams located the remains of Bill Sterling, Jack Hewitt, and Jack Madruga. Their bodies were scattered across the wilderness, separated from one another by varying distances. Authorities concluded they had succumbed to hypothermia while wandering through the brutal mountain terrain. But one member of the group remained missing, Gary Mathias. Despite extensive searches, Gary and Oppo's body was never found. The only trace of him was a pair of shoes discovered in the nearby forest. Nothing else. No body. No explanation. No answers. To this day, investigators remain puzzled by nearly every aspect of the Yuba County 5 case. Why did the men abandon a vehicle that was still functional? Why drive so far off course into the mountains in the first place? Why separate from one another in dangerous winter conditions? And why did Ted seemingly refuse to use the food, clothing, and heat that could have kept him alive? Even a witness account from Joseph Shans remains troubling. Family members insisted the men would never have ignored a stranded motorist asking for help. Yet according to Shans, they simply vanished into the darkness. Nearly 5 decades later, the mystery remains unsolved. And for many, the Yuba County 5 is not merely a missing persons case. It and Oppo's one of the strangest disappearances in American history. But if you think that and Oppo's as disturbing, the next case may be even harder to understand. Because this time, the missing person was and Oppo's. He lost in a remote mountain wilderness. He disappeared from his own hometown, without a trace. In June of 2004, 17-year-old Craig Freer seemed to have everything going for him. Friends described him as charismatic, easygoing, and impossible not to like. With his bright red hair, unmistakable dimples, and friendly smile, Craig was one of the most popular students at Scotia Glenville High School in New York. He was a talented soccer player and was expected to become captain of the team. Several colleges had already begun showing interest in offering athletic scholarships. His future appeared bright, the kind of future most teenagers dream about. Then, on June 27, 2004, everything changed. That day, Craig walked away from home and was never seen again. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Craig and Oppos, as parents believed he was heading to work at the local Price Chopper supermarket. His mother, Veronica, even remembered seeing him leave the house carrying what appeared to be his work uniform. Hours later, while shopping at the same supermarket, Veronica expected to see her son on shift. Instead, she received a shocking surprise. Craig wasn't in Oppos T there. In fact, he hadn't in Oppos T worked there for weeks. Store employees informed her that Craig had been terminated after only 2 months on the job. For reasons unknown, he had hidden the truth from his parents. Every day after being fired, he had continued leaving the house as though he were going to work. No one knows exactly where he spent those hours. The discovery left his parents confused, angry, and concerned. Desperate for answers, they began calling people who might know where Craig was. One of those calls went to his girlfriend, or rather, his ex-girlfriend, a fact his parents didn't and Oppos T yet know. When they first contacted her, she claimed she had no idea where Craig was. But during a second phone call, guilt got the better of her. She admitted he had been with her earlier that day. Craig had apparently been struggling with a recent breakup and had gone to visit her. Veronica immediately got Craig on the phone and demanded he come home. According to family members, the conversation was tense but brief. Craig agreed. He told his mother he would be home in about 10 minutes. It was the last time anyone in his family would ever hear his voice. According to his ex-girlfriend, Craig left her apartment shortly afterward and began walking toward his parked car. Then something strange happened, something she would never forget. She said Craig suddenly stopped, completely still. For several seconds, he appeared focused on something in the distance. Then, without warning, he turned and sprinted in the opposite direction, as if he had seen something terrifying, as if he were running from someone or something. The detail has haunted investigators ever since. If Craig felt threatened, why didn't Oppos T simply get into his car and drive away? Moments later, Craig and Oppos S father arrived at the apartment complex expecting to find his son. Instead, he found only Craig and Oppos S vehicle sitting exactly where it had been parked. Craig was gone. By 5 p.m., Veronica reported her son missing. Initially, authorities assumed the case involved a teenager blowing off steam after an argument. But as hours became days, that explanation quickly fell apart. Craig had left behind his wallet, his phone, his personal belongings, everything. It was as if he had vanished in the middle of an ordinary day. Then investigators received a potentially crucial lead. Several local teenagers came forward claiming they had seen Craig, or someone who looked remarkably like him, walking along the railroad tracks behind his ex-girlfriend and Oppos S apartment complex shortly before he disappeared. What happened after that remains one of the most unsettling mysteries in New York history. The teenagers told investigators something that would send chills down everyone in Oppos S spine. They claimed they had seen Craig walking near the railroad tracks behind his ex-girlfriend and Oppos S apartment complex. According to their statements, they watched as he left the tracks and slowly entered a wooded area nearby. Curious, they called out to him. But instead of responding normally, Craig turned toward them and placed a finger against his lips. A silent gesture, as if warning them not to speak, not to follow, not to make a sound. Then he turned and continued deeper into the trees until the darkness swallowed him from view. It was the last credible sighting of Craig Freer. Investigators immediately focused their attention on the surrounding woods. Search teams combed through the area for days. Police dogs followed potential scent trails. Nearby railroad tracks were searched mile after mile. Divers even examined portions of the Mohawk River. Nothing was found. No clothing, no footprints, no signs of struggle, no evidence that Craig had ever been there at all. It was as if he had simply stepped into the forest and vanished from existence. As the years passed, the investigation gradually slowed. Leads dried up. Witnesses moved away. Yet Craig and Apos' family never stopped searching for answers. Then, nearly 17 years later, an unexpected lead surfaced. In 2021, one of Craig and Apos' former co-workers from the Price Chopper supermarket came forward with information he claimed had haunted him for years. The witness told investigators that sometime between June 27th and July 2nd of 2004, he believed he had seen Craig sitting in the passenger seat of a vehicle traveling north on Route 50 in Glenville. According to his account, the vehicle stopped briefly at a traffic light near Sheffield Road before turning left and disappearing down the intersecting roadway. The sighting could never be confirmed. But if true, it would mean Craig survived longer than investigators originally believed. Perhaps he wasn't in Apos' alone. Perhaps someone else was with him. Or perhaps the witness had mistaken another young man for Craig. No one knows. More than 2 decades later, his family still waits for the phone call they and Apos' he dreamed about for years. The call that finally explains what happened to the bright young soccer star who seemed to have his entire future ahead of him. Yet despite countless theories, one question remains unanswered. Why would a popular 17-year-old suddenly abandon everything and walk into the woods? And if he didn't and Apos' leave willingly, who was waiting for him there? But as strange as Craig and Apos' disappearances, the final case may be the most disturbing of them all. Because unlike the previous mysteries, this one left behind photographs. Dozens of them. Images that continue to spark arguments, theories, and nightmares more than a decade later. In March of 2014, 2 Dutch friends, Chris Kremers and Liz Fruin, traveled to Panama to celebrate a major milestone in their lives. They had recently graduated and worked extra shift for months to save enough money for the trip. It was supposed to be an adventure, a reward, a memory they would cherish forever. Instead, it became one of the most infamous disappearance cases in modern history. After arriving in Panama, the young women settled in the mountain town of Boquete, where they stayed with a local host family. Everything appeared normal. Then, on April 1st, 2014, they set off on a hike into the forest surrounding the town. What makes the situation even stranger is that they already had plans to explore the area with an experienced guide named Feliciano the following day. Yet for reasons still debated today, they chose to hike alone. Accompanying them was the host family and Apos' dog Blue. Hours later, Blue returned home. The women did not. At first, nobody panicked. Perhaps they had stayed out longer than expected. Perhaps they had lost track of time. But as daylight faded into darkness, concern began to spread. Repeated attempts to contact them failed. Neither woman answered her phone. The following morning, Guide Feliciano arrived expecting to meet them for their scheduled excursion. They never showed up. When he visited the home where they were staying, he discovered something unsettling. Most of their belongings were still inside. The women had seemingly vanished while carrying only the essentials. Soon, panic gripped the entire community. Police were notified. Search parties formed. Locals, farmers, volunteers, search dogs, detectives, and helicopters flooded the region. For 10 exhausting days, teams searched rivers, trails, ravines, and dense jungle terrain. Nothing. No sign of Chris. No sign of Liz. No clue where they had gone. Then, 2 months later, the case took a horrifying turn. A local woman discovered a backpack near a riverbank. The bag belonged to one of the missing women. Inside were personal items, including their phones and a camera. But investigators would soon discover something even more disturbing. Human remains. Fragments of skeletal remains were eventually recovered and later confirmed through DNA testing to belong to both women. Yet the evidence only deepened the mystery. When investigators analyzed the women and Apos' cell phone records, they uncovered a desperate timeline. 4 days after disappearing, repeated emergency calls had been attempted. Again and again, The women tried contacting emergency services, but there was no signal, no connection, no rescue. Initially, investigators believed the most likely explanation was that the pair had become lost or injured in the unforgiving jungle. But then they examined the camera and the photographs. Inside the camera and Apo's memory card were roughly 100 images. Many showed exactly what you and Apo's expect from two friends enjoying a tropical adventure. Scenic trails, smiling faces, breathtaking views. Then something changed. Investigators discovered that only hours after one particularly cheerful photograph was taken, emergency calls began. Something had gone terribly wrong. Even stranger, around 10 of the photographs documented their hike during daylight hours. The remaining images were entirely different. Nearly 90 photographs had been taken in the middle of the night, between roughly 1 a.m. and 4 a.m., in complete darkness. Flash after flash illuminated empty jungle surroundings. Trees, rocks, branches, darkness, more darkness. Some investigators believe the women were using the camera flash to navigate at night or signal rescuers. Others aren't and Apo's so sure. One photograph appears to show the back of Chris and Apo's head. Some observers claim a possible injury is visible near her temple, along with what looks like blood in her hair. Was Liz documenting an injury, trying to assess the damage? Or was someone else behind the camera? That question has fueled speculation for years. Some theorists believe Chris may already have been dead when the image was taken. Others suggest a third person was present in the jungle, someone who never came forward. Adding to the mystery, investigators recovered a hiking boot that still contained part of a foot believed to belong to Chris. A pelvic bone belonging to Liz was also discovered. The findings shocked investigators and generated endless theories online. Even today, despite years of analysis, debate, and investigation, many people remain unconvinced that a simple accident explains everything that happened in those remote Panamanian forests. And that lingering uncertainty is exactly what makes this case so haunting. Because sometimes the most terrifying mysteries aren't and Apo's the ones with monsters. They and Apo's the ones that leave just enough evidence behind to make you wonder what really happened in the darkness. According to the official explanation, investigators believe the most likely scenario is that the two women accidentally wandered off the main trail. Somewhere deep within the dense Panamanian jungle, one of them may have suffered an injury. The other may have stayed behind to help. Then, in a cruel chain of events, both became trapped in terrain they couldn't and Apo's escape. Lost, injured, cut off from help. As the days passed, starvation, dehydration, exhaustion, and exposure may have slowly taken their toll. At least, that end Apo's the theory. But for many people following the case, the evidence leaves behind far too many unanswered questions. Questions that refuse to go away. Questions that continue to fuel debate more than a decade later. Because while the lost hiker theory explains some of the evidence, it doesn't end Apo's explain everything. And that in Apo's, that's where the mystery becomes truly unsettling. One of the most discussed aspects of the case involves their guide, Feliciano, the man who had been scheduled to accompany the women on a hike the day after they disappeared. Over the years, numerous online discussions and theories have attempted to connect him to the case. Some internet users have pointed to reviews and personal accounts from travelers who claimed they felt uncomfortable around him. Others have highlighted stories alleging inappropriate comments or overly familiar behavior during tours. However, none of these claims have ever been proven to connect him to the disappearance of Chris and Liz. Still, the speculation persists, partly because of one detail many people find difficult to ignore. During the search effort, Feliciano reportedly played a role in locating evidence connected to the case, including an area where important remains were eventually discovered. To some observers, this was merely the result of a guide who knew the terrain better than anyone else. To others, it raised uncomfortable questions, questions that have never been fully answered. Was it simply coincidence? Or was there something investigators missed? No evidence has ever conclusively linked any individual to harming the two women. And despite years of investigation, authorities have never officially classified the case as a homicide. Yet the mystery remains alive because so many pieces of the puzzle seem incomplete. The emergency calls, the strange nighttime photographs, the scattered remains, the missing answers. Each clue seems to point in a different direction, and every theory leaves something unexplained. Perhaps Chris Kremers and Liz and Fruen were simply victims of a tragic accident in one of the world and Oppo's most unforgiving environments. Or perhaps there is another chapter to this story that has never been uncovered. A chapter hidden somewhere within the dense forests and steep ravines surrounding Boquete. For now, nobody knows for certain. And that may be the most disturbing part of all. Because unlike most mysteries, this one doesn't end Oppo's end with a solution. It ends with a question. What really happened to Chris and Liz and during those 10 days in the jungle? Until that question is answered, their disappearance will continue to haunt investigators, researchers, and curious minds around the world. And somewhere within those dark forests, the truth may still be waiting to be found.